Shabbat Shalom. So the Haftarah for this week begins with the famous lines, Nachamu, Nachamu. Comfort, comfort my people. Indeed, this Shabbat after Tisha B'Av has become known as Shabbat Nachamu because of this message of comfort, which will stretch through the special Haftarot which we read between this week and Rosh Hashanah. And yes, that means we are in the countdown to the high holidays. And in this Haftarah, the prophet Isaiah gives this beautiful image of God clearing the way, clearing the road to allow us to come home, to return from the exile of Babylon, to return after the destruction of the first temple and the catastrophe that had befallen us some 70 years prior. But is it that easy to come home? Is it that easy to find your way back? Because remember, the first temple fell because of the people, because of their choices. It wasn't that there was some terrible, sinister enemy that came in and attacked the poor, innocent, perfectly righteous Jewish nation. These were pretty rotten people who had spent the better part of 400 years engaged in the worst immorality imaginable. They had murdered each other, they had stolen from each other, they had cheated and betrayed each other, they had exploited each other in every way you can consider, and they had rejected God. They had turned to idols and statues and other pagan deities and turned their back on God completely. Can you still come home? Can you burn your bridge so badly that there's no way back? Certainly many people have considered this in their own family or personal lives, having said something that was irredeemable. And even if they later regret it, the road home is no longer there. It has been washed away in shouted words, in hasty actions, in bitterness. Certainly nothing is left to return. Well, Judaism has had to contend with this issue. We have had to contend over our thousands of years of people who left, oftentimes against their will, but more often than perhaps we'd like to admit, people who willingly left the fold, who said, you know what, being a Jew is hard. I don't just mean the commandments, but I mean, if you live within a Muslim majority, Christian majority country for most of the last 2,000 years, being a Jew is a bit of a pain. And it would be a lot easier to simply join the majority religion and be done with it. Sometimes there were additional pressures, but let's just take for the moment that there were some people who did the calculation, and it just seemed easier to go ahead and embrace the other faith. Should they change their mind 5, 10 years down the road, can they come back? Somebody who has bowed to Mecca, somebody who has been baptized as a Christian, no matter that they had been born a Jew, they come back and they knock on the door of the synagogue. What do we say? Welcome? Throw open our arms, no problem. Hey, it's like nothing ever happened. Start over again. You're back on square one, buddy. Well, let me ask you this. In the meantime, imagine the person who has willingly converted to another faith. They knock on the door of the synagogue and they say, hey, look, I'm still Christian, I'm still Muslim, I'm still whatever I have become that I now identify other than Jewish. Can I have an aliyah? No. Jewish law says no. Can I be counted in the minyan? No. As long as you self-identify with another faith in opposition to Judaism, then you don't count as part of the community when we are counting the numbers of the community. You don't have the ability, the authority, the privilege to stand on the bimah next to the Torah and say that God has given us this Torah if you have turned your back on it. But there is, Miriam, did you raise your hand? But don't we still see them? But don't we still see them as Jewish? Don't we still admit that they are Jewish? That they're not doing what we think a Jew should do, but don't we still admit that they are Jewish? When Bernie Madoff defrauded Jewish and non-Jewish organizations in his Ponzi scheme, did we say, he's no longer Jewish. We have banished him from among our nation? No, we can't. Like families, as much as we may be displeased by their behavior, they are still part of the family. We can be uncomfortable with them, we can be angry with them, we can certainly disapprove of them, but we cannot revoke their membership in the family. And indeed, in Judaism, if somebody is known for not being a perfect tzaddik, a perfectly righteous person, do we count them in the minyan? Of course. Do we give them an aliyah? Of course. If their crimes have reached a level of public shame and embarrassment, then yes, we will usually refrain from offering them an aliyah or other honors, but we would still count them as part of a minyan. So why is it that idolatry? Why is it that a full rejection of Judaism for another faith creates a different barrier to inclusion and participation? Aaron? It's a rejection of Jewish values and the way Jewish people live. Yes, but so is murder, so is theft, so is defrauding a person. Those are also rejections of Jewish values. That's okay if you want to. We have the. So we're going to deal with the return part, but at the moment I want to make sure we understand the distant part, because the return makes no sense without understanding the distance. Absolutely. Imagine the person on the bima who has an aliyah, who says, Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach, give praise to the God, the eternal God, and that person believes in Zeus. That person believes in Baal. That person believes in some other deity. How can they be calling on people to praise? And how could the community possibly answer their request when so ordered? It is the height of hypocrisy, and it is the height of self-contradiction. So as Aaron mentioned, we want people to represent Jewish values, at least theoretically, when they stand on the bima. We are all imperfect, something that our tradition teaches us very, very clearly. We all have flaws, and we all are in need of personal mending. But there is a difference between making mistakes and believing that the basic principle which establishes what is right and what is wrong is a mistake. The idolater, the person who rejects Judaism wholesale, from start to finish, not they struggle with this commandment or that commandment, but all of it, from God on, from day one, from principle one, that there is a God and only one God, that person has undermined the entirety of Judaism with that one action. And as such, they cannot be accepted as part of the minyan, counted as part of the minyan. They cannot have honor on the bima or any other form. They are kept at a distance, even as we lament, for in our hearts we know they are still part of the family. And that brings us to the return. A person who chooses to return back to Judaism, having embraced some other faith for some period of time, is indeed welcome back. We are a little hesitant. We make sure that this person is sincere and honest, that they have indeed put aside whatever trappings may have gone with their previous faith that they had adopted temporarily, but they are welcome back. Now, if it has taken more than one generation, as has happened in many communities where people who left Judaism find that their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or even later descendants have found their way back to Judaism, thank God, then we do a form of immersion in the mikvah as a way of giving them that fresh start, that clean slate, to say very clearly, I am rejecting the apostasy of my ancestor, and I am returning, as is my right and my heritage, to be clearly among the Jewish people. But that's it. We don't make them sign a special oath. We don't make them stand in a special place in the synagogue. We don't view them with suspicion and scorn. We allow them to publicly return, and we embrace them publicly in return. Judaism believes that there is no such thing as a mistake that is unfixable. There is no action that is irredeemable. There is no person that is lost irrevocably. All souls can find their way back. Some, it's a little bit easier than others. Some have special challenges. Some, the return will be left to their descendants. But Judaism remains committed to the concept that God welcomes us back at all times and under all circumstances with love, with compassion, with understanding. And thus, we can continue our journey together with God, knowing that whatever was in the past is only the past, and the future will be together. Shabbat Shalom.